Entry number 1. Logbook of Lyra. Date: March 7th, 2320. I have arrived. The moment the shuttle's hatch opened, I felt it. The weight of a darkness so complete, it was almost alive. Nocturne 5 is not just a planet shrouded in night. It is night. Endless, eternal, unbroken by dawn or dusk. There is no sun here. Not even the faint suggestion of starlight reaches the surface. The sky above is a canvas of pure black, thick as ink, pressing down like an invisible ceiling. As I stepped out of the airlock, my boots sank slightly into the soft, granular soil, cold and fine like volcanic ash. The air was surprisingly still, thick with humidity, and carried an odd scent I couldn't quite place, something metallic, like rusted iron left too long in the rain. My helmet's visor adjusted to the pitch-black surroundings, but even with enhanced sensors, the world beyond remained a murky blur. There were no landmarks, no silhouettes of trees or hills, no shadows. Because here, light has no source. And yet, the darkness is not silent. Somewhere beyond the limits of my vision, I could hear faint, rhythmic pulses. Not mechanical, organic, like the low thrum of enormous creatures exhaling beneath the surface, or perhaps the echo of some distant, ancient breath. It wasn't threatening, yet it stirred something deep in me. A reminder that I am a guest on a world that does not belong to light, or to warmth, or to any sense of comfort I have ever known. I turned on the pathlight embedded in my sleeve. A thin beam stretched out ahead but faded quickly, swallowed by the dark like a flame in a void. The light didn't bounce, didn't scatter. It just vanished, as if even photons feared to linger here. Still, there was movement. Bioluminescent particles drifted through the air like floating spores, soft, greenish glows no larger than grains of sand. They moved without wind, guided by currents I could neither see nor feel. Occasionally, I spotted faint trails of light weaving in the distance, slender arcs, like underwater creatures trailing phosphorescent tendrils through the blackness. It was beautiful, in a haunted, otherworldly way. The darkness here isn't just absence. It's substance. I could feel it on my skin, even through the suit, pressing in, enveloping me. It reminded me of being underwater, blindfolded, alone. My senses were dulled and sharpened all at once. Every step became a test of faith. Every sound, a whisper from the void. There were no stars above me. Ironically, that was why I had come. On Earth, the stars are muted, blurred by atmosphere, drowned by cities that never sleep. But here, without a sun, without atmosphere, without light, this planet offers a purity of night that no observatory could ever dream of. My mission is simple: map the oldest stars in the sector from the surface of a planet untouched by illumination. But as I stood there, surrounded by that infinite darkness, I realized this place was not just dark, it was hungry. It absorbs not just light, but time, and thought, and breath. And I must learn how to see without seeing. Entry number 2. Logbook of Lyra. Date: March 8th, 2320. My name is Lyra Elwood. I am 56 years old, a child of stardust and telescopes. Ever since I was a girl, I've looked up. While other children built castles in the sand, I traced constellations in the sky. My father used to take me to the observatory near Cape Morn. We would lie on the roof in winter, wrapped in thermal blankets, watching the stars blink like secrets too far to hear. I still remember the sound of his voice pointing out Antares, Vega, the Orion Nebula, each name a whisper of something older than memory. But I never told him that I was afraid of the dark. I still am. When the lights went out, even for a moment, a cold fear would bloom in my chest. As a child, I refused to sleep without a nightlight. I imagined shadows creeping across the floor, monsters hidden beneath the bed, voices in the closet. Foolish fears, perhaps, but fear doesn't care about reason. Coming to Nocturne 5 wasn't just a scientific mission. It was a confrontation. I could have studied from orbit or accessed archival data from the deep sky arrays. But none of it would show me what I needed to understand, not just scientifically, but spiritually. The truth is, I needed to be here, to stand where no light has touched, to see what the stars look like when stripped of atmosphere, pollution, and even hope. There's a legend among old astronomers, one I used to laugh at, about a star so old, its light no longer burns, but hums. A ghost of a star, whispering across space-time. I've always wondered if we could hear it, if we just found the right silence. That's why I volunteered. Not for the accolades, or the research grants, or the data that will one day sit on dusty university shelves. I came because I wanted to know what the stars sound like in a place where even darkness has no rival. Still, as I sit here in the dim interior of my research pod, wrapped in the artificial warmth of recycled air and faint hums of the equipment, I cannot pretend I am not afraid. The walls creak with the cold. My light flickers as if protesting its own existence. And outside, there is nothing. No landmarks. No horizon. Just dark. A childish part of me still waits for something to emerge from that black. Something with too many limbs. Or none at all. And yet, here I am. Perhaps this is what it means to grow older. Not to stop being afraid, but to stop letting fear decide for you. I don't know what I'll find here. Maybe nothing but silence. Maybe something ancient watching from the other side of the void. But I have to look. I have to listen. The stars are waiting. Entry number 3, Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 9th, 2320. Tonight, I left the pod. I told myself it was just a routine inspection, a systems check on the perimeter sensors. But the truth is, I needed to know. Needed to feel the world with nothing between us but the thin skin of my suit and a courage I wasn't sure I had. The moment I stepped beyond the airlock, the darkness devoured me. Not figuratively, not poetically, literally. There was no adjustment. No time for my eyes to acclimate, because there was nothing to adjust to. My helmet's HUD flashed static, then faded, as if the darkness itself corrupted the software. The ground beneath my feet felt colder than before, softer too, as though I had stepped onto something that was not soil but memory, old and brittle. I walked 5 steps forward. 5 exact steps. And then I froze. The light from the pod behind me barely reached my boots. The air was heavier here. I could hear my breath echoing inside the helmet. But outside, it was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, predatory quiet. Like something was holding its breath, waiting for me to speak first. I stood very still. That's when I heard it again, the whisper. Not a word, not a voice, but a presence in the sound. A shift in pressure. A distant vibration, like the scraping of claws against stone or the sigh of wind that has lost its way. My heart thudded in my ears, a drumbeat far too loud for such a still world. Was it the planet? Some creature evolved in shadow? Or was it my own fear speaking in the language of paranoia? I turned my head. Nothing. I blinked. Still nothing. But my skin crawled beneath the suit. Then, slowly, tiny glimmers appeared. At first I thought they were hallucinations, stars that shouldn't be there. But they weren't in the sky. They hovered in the air around me, no larger than motes of dust. Bioluminescent spores, perhaps. They floated closer, drawn to the faint warmth of my body, or maybe to the trembling rhythm of my pulse. They shimmered, green, then blue, then violet, soft as breath. I held out my gloved hand, and one of them landed on my fingertip. It stayed for a moment, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Then, just as quickly, it drifted away. For a second, I forgot to be afraid. But the dark didn't. Suddenly, I heard movement. Quick, deliberate. Not from the spores, something heavier. I turned around sharply, light scanning. My pulse spiked. My suit registered a spike in adrenaline. The sensor couldn't identify the source. And yet, I felt watched. The kind of feeling you get when walking through an empty museum at night, and the statues feel too real. Something unseen. Patient. I stumbled back toward the pod, one careful step at a time, refusing to run. Running would make it real. Would make me real to it. As I sealed the hatch behind me, the pod's lights reasserted themselves, weak but steady. The hum of life support returned like a lullaby. And yet, I couldn't stop shivering. I sat for hours in silence, replaying the moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That darkness is just darkness. But deep down, I know better. Nocturne 5 is not empty. It is not lifeless. And it is not blind. It sees differently. It feels differently. And now, it knows I'm here. Entry number 4, Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 10th, 2320. Tonight, the darkness feels heavier. Maybe it's the silence, maybe it's the memory, but something inside me aches. I miss Earth. Not the noise. Not the endless schedules or the towers scraping the edge of orbit. I miss the quiet places. The places where light was gentle and time moved like a slow breath. There was a hill behind my childhood home in Vermont. My father built a small observatory there, just a dome and a rusted telescope, more passion than precision. Every winter, we would climb the icy slope with thermos flasks and star charts tucked under our arms. The snow would crunch beneath our boots, and our laughter would echo through the pines, carried away by wind. I remember lying beside him, wrapped in layers, breath turning to mist. Above us, the stars danced. He'd tell me stories, old myths, scientific marvels, cosmic accidents. I learned to tell time by Orion's belt and to measure distance in light years, not miles. To him, the night sky wasn't just beautiful, it was humbling. A cathedral of silence and fire. There was always a kind of magic in the way starlight touched the snow. Even the coldest nights felt warm beneath that ancient glow. It made me feel small in the best way, like I was part of something vast and kind. Here, on Nocturne 5, that warmth is gone. There are no constellations to guide me, no familiar markers, no moon to whisper the passage of time. Just black. Sometimes, I close my eyes and pretend I'm back on that hill. I can almost hear the soft click of the telescope's gears, the thermos pouring hot cocoa, my father's voice as he murmurs, "That one's Cassiopeia. She's upside down tonight." I smile at the memory. Then I open my eyes. The darkness presses closer. It's strange how we take light for granted. On Earth, even the darkest night holds some comfort. A flickering window. A distant street lamp. The promise of sunrise. Here, there is no promise. Only the unknown. But perhaps that's why I came. To remember what it means to wonder. To search the void not for fear, but for connection. Still, I miss the stars as I once knew them. I miss the sky that held me like an old friend. And most of all, I miss the light. Entry number 5, Logbook of Lyra, date, March 11th, 2320. I wasn't always afraid of the dark. Not until that night. I must have been 6, maybe 7. My parents had left me at my aunt's farmhouse for the weekend, an old place nestled deep in the woods, where the night arrived early and stayed too long. I remember the fireplace crackling, the smell of cedar, and the shadows that danced on the wooden walls like silent ghosts. That first night, there was a storm. The wind howled through the trees like something alive. Lightning painted the ceiling with jagged bones, and thunder followed close behind, shaking the glass in its frame. I was in the guest room, alone. The power went out. One moment there was dim, yellow warmth. The next, nothing. No light. No sound beyond the storm. No voices. Just black. I cried out for my aunt. No answer. I crawled under the blanket, clutching my stuffed bear so tightly it seemed split. I held my breath, listening for footsteps, for anything. Instead, I heard creaks and whispers that weren't there before. I imagined eyes watching me from the closet, fingers reaching from beneath the bed. But the worst part wasn't what I thought I saw. It was the stillness. The absolute stillness. The kind that makes your own breath sound too loud, your heartbeat feel like footsteps. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion. But the fear lingered. It never left. Even after the lights returned, even after my parents picked me up and told me I was safe, something had changed. Darkness had become a living thing. Not a backdrop, but a presence. A watcher. A wait. I avoided it ever since. I kept nightlights well into adulthood. I made sure my workspaces were always brightly lit. I preferred the moon over the new moon. And I never went camping. People laugh when you say you're afraid of the dark. They think of childhood and monsters and fairy tales. But I know better. Darkness is real. It's not just what you can't see, it's what you feel in the absence. It's how silence gets loud. How memory distorts. How fear takes shape when nothing else does. Now I find myself on a planet made of it. The irony isn't lost on me. The girl who once cried in a farmhouse is now alone on a world where night is law and day is myth. I told myself I had grown past it. That science would save me. That reason would outshine fear. But science doesn't change the way your hands tremble when the lights flicker. Reason doesn't hush the voice that says you shouldn't be here. Still, here I am. Maybe I came to prove something. Maybe I thought the stars would be bright enough to silence the dark. But they aren't. Not yet. I hope that somewhere inside this fear, I'll find the shape of something else. Something braver. Something stronger. Because right now, I'm not sure which will consume me first, my fear or the night. Entry number 6, Logbook of Lyra, date, March 12th, 2320. I didn't sleep last night. The dreams came early, thick, indistinct shapes moving just beyond the veil of memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself back in that farmhouse room, trapped in a box of darkness that breathed and watched. But this time, the door never opened. This time, no one came. So I stayed awake. And I thought about why I'm here. About why I chose this place of all places when I could have remained in my observatory on Luna Station, safe behind solar panels and reinforced glass. About what it means to choose darkness after a lifetime of avoiding it. And somewhere, beneath all that noise in my mind, a quiet truth settled in. I can't let this fear define me anymore. Not because I've suddenly become brave. Not because the shadows no longer whisper. But because this fear has followed me like a shadow my entire life, and I am tired of running. I came to Nocturne 5 to study the stars. That's still true. But more than that, I think I came to meet myself. The version of me that never needed nightlights. The version that walks into the dark, trembling but unbroken. The version that believes light isn't something you carry in your hand, but something you build in your chest, one breath at a time. I don't know how to erase a lifetime of fear. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe fear doesn't need to disappear for courage to grow. This morning, if you can call it that, on a planet with no dawn, I stepped outside again. No task, no mission, just a step. The dark was still there, dense and absolute. The whispering sounds returned. The sense of being watched hadn't faded. But neither did I. I stood still. I breathed. I whispered back. And for a brief moment, it felt like the darkness listened. I know it won't get easier overnight. I know my instincts will keep screaming. But I also know that each step I take out there is a declaration. I am not lost. I am learning to see differently. I don't expect to conquer the darkness. But perhaps, if I keep walking through it, I will learn to carry light where none exists. That is why I must stay. That is why I must keep going. Entry number 7, Logbook of Lyra, date, March 13th, 2320. It's strange how quickly the body begins to adjust when the mind decides to stop fighting. Today, for the first time, I walked more than 50 meters from the pod. No mission, no timer, just silence. Just me, in the dark. I moved slowly, trusting the motion sensors embedded in my gloves and boots. The suit hummed faintly, interpreting distance, mapping terrain through low-frequency pulses like echolocation. I followed the soft vibrations beneath my feet, like a blind woman learning to dance with the floor. And somewhere along the way, I stopped missing the light. Not because I no longer needed it, but because I was beginning to hear things I never could before. The planet speaks, if you know how to listen. Under the oppressive silence, there's a rhythm, deep and slow, like breath filtered through stone. When I stopped walking and stood perfectly still, I could feel the pulse of the world beneath me. Not mechanical. Organic. Alive. Then, there were the creatures. Small at first, bioluminescent insects fluttering by, tracing my path with ghostly trails of blue. Then larger shapes, barely visible but present, crawling, gliding, moving with a purpose. They made no sound, at least not to human ears. But I began to notice patterns in how they moved. Like choreography in the dark. In their eyes, I'm not sure they have them. Some appeared to sense vibration. Others responded to the electromagnetic field of my suit. One creature, no larger than a rabbit, approached slowly, sniffed the air, then turned away, its body glowing faintly with a dull orange pulse. It was beautiful. Here, sight is a luxury, not a necessity. Everything else, sound, heat, motion, breath, becomes vital. I still carry a pathlight, but I use it less now. It draws too much attention. It's too loud, in a place where even light can feel like shouting. I'm learning to trust the dark, to feel instead of see, to sense rather than search. It's a strange freedom, surrendering visibility and finding clarity in return. A different kind of perception, closer to instinct than thought. And in some strange, unsettling way, I feel more present here than I have in years. Back on Earth, I spent so much time staring at screens, filtering data, interpreting signals from galaxies too distant to touch. But here, in this thick blackness, I am finally in the space between stars. Not watching, not analyzing, living. There's fear, yes, but there's also wonder. I am beginning to believe the two can coexist. Entry number 8, Logbook of Lyra, date, March 14th, 2320. I made contact today, not with stars, not with signals or fragments of ancient light, but with them. I was walking along a shallow ridge near the pod, mapping ambient radiation levels. My sensor registered a sudden drop, followed by a surge in low-frequency vibration, almost like sonar. At first, I thought it was another subterranean life form. But then I heard it. A pulse. Then another. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Structured. I stopped moving, breath held, heart pounding. My suit translated nothing. No language, no recognizable pattern, but I recognized it. Someone was trying to speak. Then I felt it. A presence. No footsteps. No light. Just a shift in the air, like heat bending reality ever so slightly. I turned slowly, and there it was. A shape. Tall, humanoid in proportion, but fluid. The darkness clung to it like a cloak, revealing nothing of skin or face. Only outlines. A faint shimmer traced its form, like fog disturbed by motion. It stood 3 meters from me. Still, watching. I raised my hand slowly. Not a wave, just an opening. A gesture of peace. My gloves emitted a low-frequency tone, soft and steady. The being paused, then responded. Not with sound, but with vibration. My chest plate pulsed gently, as if someone had tapped it from the inside. My HUD flickered. The systems couldn't explain it, but I knew it was them. Communicating. Not through voice or vision, but through resonance. I tried to mimic the pattern. The being tilted its head, then stepped closer. I felt the air around me tighten, as if gravity itself was holding its breath. Closer now, I could see it wasn't one creature, but a cluster. Others emerged from the dark, silent and graceful. No two looked the same, but they shared that same quality. Outlines shifting like shadow, no defined edges, no visible eyes. But they saw me. I felt them seeing me. And I realized, this was not curiosity. It was caution. I was a disruption here. An anomaly wrapped in metal and heat and noise. They didn't understand me. Perhaps they feared me. Or worse, they pitied me. I tried sending another tone, gentler this time, more rhythmic. One of them answered by lowering its head and pulsing light from its chest in 3 soft beats. I stood still, memorizing everything. No data recorder could capture the nuance of that moment, the eerie beauty of meeting a civilization that had never known light and never needed it. They didn't stay long. One by one, they vanished, melting back into the blackness like mist evaporating into the night. But they left something behind, a signal pattern embedded in the air. My sensors picked it up as a standing wave, like a breadcrumb trail, waiting to be followed. An invitation? Or a warning? I don't know, but I will follow it. Because for the first time since landing, I don't feel entirely alone. I feel seen. And even in the dark, being seen matters. Entry number 9, Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 15th, 2320. Something is wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Not with data, not with logic, but I feel it. The air is different tonight. Thicker, heavier, as if the planet is holding something back. Or waiting. I tried to sleep, but the silence kept shifting. At first it was subtle, a flicker in the ambient hum of the pod, a delay in the pressure regulation system. Then, outside, I heard it again. Whispers. Not voices. Not words. But movement. Not physical, but felt. I turned off all external lights hours ago to conserve power. I've grown used to the dark. I thought I had trained myself to move through it without panic. But tonight, the dark feels closer. I stood by the airlock, helmet on, just watching. The viewports showed nothing, of course, just black on black. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pressing against the glass, not physically, but psychically, like a weight in my chest that tightened every time I blinked. The whispers grew louder. No language, just impressions, like memories that don't belong to me. Cold water, a locked door, footsteps with no body. And then, I saw something. No, not saw, sensed. Movement, just beyond the pod. A flicker of bioluminescence, then nothing. No sensor data. No heat signature. Just gone. I backed away. My breath fogged the visor. My hands trembled. I tried to focus on my training, to recite the emergency checklist in my mind. Step 1, remain calm. Step 2, stabilize heartbeat. Step 3, the whispers returned. This time inside my head. No words. Just pressure. Like something trying to open a door inside me I had long since sealed shut. I ripped off the helmet. Fell to the floor. Breathed. The pod lights flickered for a moment before returning to their usual dim glow. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2. Not thinking. Just existing. Letting the silence be silence again. I thought I had conquered my fear. But fear isn't something you kill. It's something that sleeps. And here, on Nocturne 5, it sleeps lightly. Entry number 10, Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 16th, 2320. They returned. Just before my 4th hour outside today, I felt the pressure shift again. The same low-frequency signature I recorded days ago. Not a sound, not quite. More like a presence brushing against the edge of my consciousness. I stopped walking, slowed my breath, waited. This time I was ready. I activated the harmonic translator, an experimental device built for nonverbal, non-visual communication. It doesn't use light or language. It listens for rhythm, for intention. I broadcast the pattern I remembered from our first encounter. 3 soft pulses, rising in frequency, then falling. Nothing. Then, slowly, an answer. The pulses came from behind me, spaced precisely, like a heartbeat not my own. When I turned, they were there. 4 of them. Tall, fluid, cloaked in living shadow. I couldn't see their faces, if they even had faces, but I didn't need to. Their presence filled the space between us like a low, resonant chord. Not threatening, just curious. I knelt, not out of fear, out of respect. And for the first time since arriving, I felt something new in the dark. Permission. One of them stepped closer. A light stirred in its chest, subtle, like the glow of embers hidden beneath ash. I mimicked the motion, tapping my glove over my heart in sync. The harmonic translator recorded the interaction, translating the waveform into something like music. Low, slow, beautiful. They led me deeper. I followed without resistance. The ground sloped gently downward, toward a cavern hidden beneath the ridge. As we entered, my suit detected rising temperature and bioluminescent activity. But I didn't turn on any light. I trusted them now, or at least I chose to. The cavern opened into something vast. I couldn't see its walls, only the faint glimmer of life all around. Translucent tendrils hanging like vines, pulsing with soft color. Creatures crawled along the edges, blind, delicate, singing through vibration. A chorus without sound. At the center of the space was a pool, shallow, still, glowing from within. Not bright, just enough to break the black. One of the beings stepped into the pool and pressed a hand to its surface. Ripples formed, and from the water came light. Soft, golden strands emerged like memory made physical, swirling upward and dancing across the ceiling. Shapes flickered in the patterns, stars, or their version of stars. A night sky, carved from darkness itself. I stood there, breath caught, tears stinging my eyes. They weren't showing me data. They were sharing understanding. Not light as humans know it, but light as they feel it. I reached toward the pool, not touching, just letting my presence be known. Another ripple, another glow, another beginning. Entry number 11, Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 17th, 2320. I used to think I understood light. Photons, refraction, luminosity. I could quote Kelvin temperatures in my sleep, recite the behavior of electromagnetic waves, explain how light travels across billions of years to touch a lens with a whisper from the past. But I never truly understood light. Not until now. Not until I stood inside a cavern of darkness, surrounded by beings who had never seen a sun, and watched them summon light. Not with fire or fusion, but with memory and meaning. The glow I witnessed yesterday still lingers behind my eyes. Not as an image, but as a feeling. It wasn't just brightness piercing through blackness. It was communication, reverence, presence. They don't see light. They sense it. And more importantly, they become it in moments of deep connection. That cavern wasn't just a place of gathering. It was a cathedral, a sacred site where their version of the cosmos came alive, not through stars in the sky, but through vibration and shared resonance. And I was allowed to witness it. No light bulb, no sun, just pulses, patterns, warmth blooming in the chest. I sat there for what felt like hours after they left, staring into the pool, not searching for data, not trying to document anything, just feeling. And as I sat in the glow of that faint, golden shimmer, I realized something simple and terrifying. All my life, I believed light had to be seen to be real. But what if it doesn't? What if light is not an external phenomenon, but an internal orientation, a way of reaching for each other in the void, a way of saying, I am here. You are not alone. On Earth, light is everywhere, but we rarely notice it. Street lamps, screens, the relentless glare of cities. And yet so many feel lost, isolated, cold. Here, in the absence of all that, I feel something warmer than I've felt in years. Maybe light isn't just what banishes darkness. Maybe it's what gives darkness its meaning. And if that's true, then perhaps I was never really afraid of the dark. I was afraid of not finding the light within it. Entry number 12. Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 18th, 2320. Tonight, the sky opened. Not above me, but around me. They led me there. The same beings who once lingered at the edge of my perception now walked beside me, silent as ever, but no longer distant. I could feel their intention in every step, their patience as they waited for me to follow, not just physically, but with trust. We climbed. I hadn't known there were elevations on Nocturne 5. Everything I'd encountered until now had been flat, soft, vast. But here, the terrain rose, gently at first, then sharply. My legs ached with the incline, and the gravitational pull of this planet, ever so slightly heavier than Earth's, pressed into my spine. Still, I climbed. At the summit, they stopped. One of them reached forward and touched the ground. A soft pulse. The earth beneath us responded, almost imperceptibly. Then, slowly, silently, the rock around us began to shift, cracking open like petals at midnight. A dome unfolded. Not built. Grown. It was translucent, almost invisible, but my visor caught the faint shimmer of its curved edges. Inside, the air was thinner, clearer. The electromagnetic interference that had plagued my instruments since arrival vanished. This was the place. My hands trembled as I unpacked the deep sky sensor array. It was old tech, modified for dark-field observation, designed to work in zero-light conditions. I calibrated the angles, adjusted the resonance filters, and activated the lens. And then, I saw them. The stars. But not as I had ever seen them before. Here, without atmosphere. Without light pollution. Without anything to dim or bend or distort, they burned with a clarity that felt almost wrong. Like I was seeing something sacred without permission. Old stars. Cold stars. Dying stars. The edges of known space shimmered into focus. Ancient constellations long forgotten by human tongues. Radiation signatures older than Earth itself. The data streamed in clean, uninterrupted. I wept. Not because of the success, but because I hadn't done this alone. They stood around me, not watching the stars, they couldn't, but feeling the shift. The harmony. They understood this moment in a way no human ever could. Not as science, but as shared experience. One of them touched my shoulder, soft, deliberate. And in that gesture, I felt it. Not just acceptance. Belonging. My mission, in the technical sense, is now complete. The data I've gathered here will reshape how we map deep space objects for decades to come. But it's not the charts I'll remember. Not the readings. It's the silence. The stillness. The fact that a people who dwell in endless night helped a stranger see the stars more clearly than ever before. Entry number 13. Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 19th, 2320. It came without warning. No tremor. No sound. No pulse. Just silence followed by nothing. I was inside the dome, reviewing the star maps, when the pressure changed. At first, I thought it was an equipment glitch. Readings dropped to zero across every sensor. No electromagnetic field. No atmospheric reading. No resonance from the translator. Then, the light died. Not just the sensors. Not just the interface. The bioluminescence. Gone. Like someone had sucked the glow out of the planet itself. I stepped outside. Foolishly. And the darkness swallowed me. Not like before. Not the passive, patient dark of this planet's eternal night. This was aggressive. Tactile. It pressed in from all sides, thick, suffocating. I couldn't see the ground beneath my feet. Couldn't feel the slope I just ascended. My suit's compass spun wildly. My internal clock glitched. The wind, if you could call it that, began to howl, but not with sound. With pressure. Like the breath of something vast and unknowable had been loosed. Then came the vibrations. Violent. As if the planet itself were trying to tear itself apart from the inside. My boots lost contact with the terrain for a second, then another. Gravity fluctuated. A pulse rippled through my chest, low and thunderous, and I fell. Not far. Just enough to panic. The translator on my wrist sputtered. Symbols appeared, glitching, then vanished. I tried to call for them. For the beings. For anyone. No response. Not even an echo. Even fear felt useless here, like it had no place to anchor. This wasn't a storm in any meteorological sense. This was something else. A phenomenon with no weather pattern. No center. Just absence. An event built from the collapse of certainty. I crawled. Hands and knees, fingers scraping alien soil, blind and gasping. My helmet fogged with every ragged breath. The air tasted wrong, metallic, like scorched memory. I lost track of direction, of time, of self. Everything blurred into black. Black within black. Darkness inside of darkness. And then stillness. Worse than the storm. No sound. No movement. As if even the planet had stopped breathing. I curled into myself, knees to chest, heartbeat erratic. Somewhere in the storm, I heard something familiar. A whisper. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was reminder. A memory. Of starlight on snow. Of my father's voice, gentle in the cold. Of the first time I looked through a telescope and said, I want to go there. The storm hadn't stopped, but something inside me had. I opened my eyes. Still darkness, but no longer empty. Now it held something. Me. Entry number 14. Logbook of Lyra. Date, March 19th, continued. I don't know how long I lay there. Time had unraveled, scattered like stardust in a collapsing field. Seconds didn't matter. Hours didn't matter. Only heartbeat. And mine was still there. Steady. Defiant. I began to breathe with purpose. Inhale. Exhale. Count. Focus. I let the chaos fall away, not by force, but by surrender. I stopped fighting the dark. Stopped trying to push it back. Instead, I let it be. And then, I listened. Not to the storm, but to myself. A memory surfaced. Small. Unremarkable. Me, age 9, lying on the observatory roof, a blanket around my shoulders, my fingers frozen and stiff. My father had just pointed out the Andromeda Galaxy. That light left 2 million years ago, Lyra, he said. And tonight, it finally arrived, just for you. Just for me. 2 million years of travel, through void and radiation and silence, and still, the light had made it. Unchanged. Undiminished. Maybe. So could I. I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to go deeper. And there, inside the dark behind my eyelids, I saw it. A flicker. Not external. Not bioluminescent. Mine. A warmth in my chest. Not physical. Emotional. A core memory igniting. The first star I mapped. The letter of acceptance from the Astronomical Institute. The trembling awe of launch day. The joy of discovery. The fear I overcame. One by one, they lit up. Moments. Choices. Losses. Courage. I realized, this is what light is. Not what we see. What we hold. What we protect, even when no one else can see it. What survives after everything else has been stripped away. I stood. My legs shook. My breath faltered. But my center held steady. The storm hadn't stopped, but I had changed. I activated the Pathfinder, not to call for rescue, but to find my way back. Slowly, deliberately, I walked. Step by step, hands brushing the ground, boots tracking vibration, body tuned not to fear but to rhythm. The blackness remained, but it no longer had dominion. I carried something it could not touch, and that was enough. Entry number 15, final log from Nocturne, 5, date, March 21st, 2320. The engines hum quietly beneath my feet. Departure sequence, initialized. Cargo, secured. Data, intact. Body, tired. But the light in me steady. I stood at the threshold of the airlock for longer than I should have. One final moment. One last inhale of filtered air that still carried the faintest trace of alien soil. Outside, of course, there was no sunrise. No golden farewell. Just the same infinite dark. But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked into it. Not with defiance, not with fear, but with respect. Like saying goodbye to something I had once misunderstood. A shape appeared. One of them. I couldn't tell if it was the same being who had guided me before, or perhaps it didn't matter. It stepped forward, just close enough for me to feel its presence through the hall. No words. No gesture. Just a pulse. Faint. Warm. And I answered with one of my own, placing my gloved hand on the glass and sending back a slow, steady rhythm. Thank you. For your patience. For your silence. For teaching me that darkness is not the enemy and light is not the answer. But both, when held together, can become something greater, understanding. As the engines warmed and the pod began to lift, I felt something I didn't expect. Gratitude. For the fear. For the silence. For the storm. Because without them, I would never have discovered the most distant stars or the most hidden parts of myself. Nocturne. 5 disappears beneath me now, swallowed again by the void. To others, it will look like a dead world. Cold, lightless, inhospitable. But I know better. It is alive. It is wise. And somewhere, far below, in a cavern that glows without flame, a sky without stars still sings. I carry that song with me now, wherever I go. Entry number 16, Post-Mission Reflection, date, March 25th, 2320, en route to Earth. Nocturne, 5 drifts behind me now, just another dot in the black ocean of space. Invisible, silent, but not forgotten. I've been reviewing my logs, watching the recordings, reading the sensor data. Everything looks correct, clean, scientifically invaluable. The stars I observed from the planet's surface have already begun to challenge our models of galactic age and motion. My findings will ripple through the astronomical community for decades. And yet, that's not what I think about. What I think about is the silence. The weight of darkness pressing against my skin. The moment I stopped trying to fight the unknown and started listening to it. I used to believe that knowledge would protect me, that understanding the universe would make it less terrifying. But on Nocturne 5, I learned something far more important. That fear is not a flaw. It is a compass. It tells us where the edge is, where growth waits. I was so afraid of the dark, not because of what it held, but because of what it revealed about me. The silence, the stillness, the storm. They stripped away everything I clung to, logic, light, certainty. And beneath it all, I found something quiet and steady and impossibly alive. Me. We speak of exploration as an outward journey, charting stars, discovering planets, pushing boundaries. But Nocturne 5 taught me that the greatest expedition is inward, to sit in stillness, to see without sight, to feel without fear, and to recognize that light doesn't always shine, it resonates. Sometimes, the most powerful illumination comes not from a distant sun, but from a single breath in the dark that says, I am still here. And I am. Entry number 17, Addendum to Final Log, date, March 26th, 2320. To the ones who will come after me. When you read my reports, when you study the data and debate its implications, I ask only one thing. Do not mistake the darkness for emptiness. Nocturne 5 is not barren. It is not void. It is not lost. It is listening. And if you're willing to go beyond fear, beyond the need to dominate, beyond the instinct to explain, perhaps it will speak to you too. Not in words, not in numbers, but in resonance, in the quiet pulse beneath your feet, in the rhythm between your own heartbeats, in the space where sight ends and presence begins. The beings who dwell there taught me more than any telescope ever could. They taught me how to be still, how to belong in silence, how to see with more than eyes. They showed me that even in a world without light, one can find guidance. And sometimes, the most sacred places are those that refuse to be lit, so that we may learn to carry the light ourselves. I will never forget them, nor the cavern that breathed with memory, nor the storm that stripped me bare and handed me back to myself. Nocturne 5 is a world of eternal night, and yet, it gave me the brightest moment of my life. Entry number 18, Final note to whoever's listening. I've told you my story. I've shown you the dark. I've walked through fear and silence and storms not made of rain, but of memory. And now I ask you this. Could you live in a world of eternal darkness? Not just survive, but live. Could you walk into the unknown without needing to see where it ends? Could you listen without hearing? Feel without touching? Hope without light? I don't ask to challenge you. I ask because I want to know. Because I believe, somewhere in each of us, there is a quiet flicker, a light that doesn't need fuel or flame. So I ask again, not as a scientist, but as someone who stood in the deepest dark and came back. What would you find if you stopped trying to escape the night? And would you dare, just once, to let it speak?